that feels way worse to walk out of that first session with than what they came in with.
So go back and watch this whole thing because yes, one of the things we have to understand is that when a caregiver, a clinician, a therapist brings a person into this space and says, "Hey, open up. Like, I know you're here for a reason. Let's start unpacking a little bit of this and look at it." When we ask somebody to do that and then provide a situation where we just go, "Aw, yes, I'm just providing soft, nice, kind of, I'm with you vibes." That does not work for a lot of people. Yes, this creator is talking about this in the context of men and male socialization and how this can play out, especially with this kind of idea of like how society indoctrinates and socializes men to have this need to do something, to have a project, to have ways of handling this, and that sort of just holding space can leave them more distressed and more destabilized than when they walked in, and it also can cause them to not come back to therapy because at least everything was packed in beforehand and now it feels worse and more messy and not okay, right? This is not unique to men. The creator I am stitching absolutely is focused on that, and I love that. Because this idea of just holding like soft space, I'm here. How does that make you feel? That's a running joke with the people I work with. Like with the people who have been clients, with the people who engage with me, with the people I do caregiving for, all of that. Now, I am not a therapist, so be very clear. I am not implying that I am a therapist. I am not one, but I do mental health crisis work, and I have for many, many years of my life. I first started working hotlines in my late teens. And so working crisis response, I also am somebody with complex PTSD myself and have been on the other side of this. As a military veteran with many veteran friends, this is something that PTSD, complex PTSD, is a well-known familiarity in my circles. And as such, knowing that this is not gender-based necessarily, but is very common across a wide variety of complex PTSD, not just military trauma, but any communities, because I'm in a lot of alt communities that also have a lot of complex PTSD, right? And with that kind of soft, marshmallow, clinical distance. How do you feel about that? That that is the worst way to respond so many times to people with this kind of trauma, because the reality of this is that that kind of separation of power differential very often has been used as a weapon in this person's life. It's very often created a situation in which they were helpless and a person in power used that distance as a tool to hurt them. And so when they open up to you and you help them start unpacking this, but then you don't actually finish it, right? They're just, there's just shit all over the floor now. They've unpacked this locker full of fetid bullshit of their life in front of you, and and now you go, "That's nice. I'll see you next week." What? Now all of this is out here on the floor. And like this creator says, this is something that does not help the person because they're more destabilized, and it can cause people to stop coming. It can cause people to not go back to therapy. It can cause people to not actually get the help they need because you have not provided them with an understanding of the structure of this, and you have not helped them close that back down to a level of functionality that they can go back into their life and not have it go into a tailspin because they're seeking help. Many of them already have a stigma, a demonization, a negative association with seeking out therapy, especially for a lot of men, right? But with this is so important because across any gender coming into that vulnerable space, especially with complex trauma, there's usually a rigid understanding of like everything has been locked down. We put all of the toxic soup into these barrels and they're leaking out nuclear waste, so we know we have to do something. But the biggest fear, as somebody who's gone through this myself, the biggest fear is that you're going to open that door and it's all going to come flooding out, and that you're never going to be able to stop it and your entire life's going to fuck up because of it. Like, that's why you've been locking it down and putting door after door after door on it, because you knew that it had to come out eventually. But giving people the ability to put that back together and showing them the project of how this is going to work. Listen, we're going to take this much time each session to begin unpacking things. And within this amount of time, we're going to start putting those things as orderly as we can back together, and we'll set some parameters on how we're going to continue handling this between sessions. You give them the framework. You show them that this isn't going to change who they are in a fundamental way, that this is still going to be them, that this is a way of looking at the world, that they can put these things in a place, in an order, that they can find and organize their own emotional narrative, right? And when you can show them that this is a process and give them a warmth and a practical way of putting these things back in place rather than that sort of clinical distance, you are moving more into a coaching baseline, which is where I live. I mean, that's what I do, is coaching people on this. I am not a mental health practitioner in the sense that I am a therapist, but a lot of what I do is the coaching around it, where we go into practical aspects of how to deal with this with your life. And I know not all therapists are in that realm, but it is one of the things that a lot of people who have this kind of trauma need. They need more of a practical way of engaging that sort of project, that this is a project that you attack, that we have a strategy, that we are engaging a plan to handle this particular toxic waste situation of our own emotional fuckery, right? This kind of idea of creating a strategic plan and also creating a space where you can have vulnerability, but not just this sort of soft, marshmallow, feely distance. Like that still sets me off. Like, that is something that even now I would say, absolutely, if I go into a new therapist and that is what they're providing, no, it's not happening. Beyond that fact, a lot of people in their intake will give you one of two things. A lot of people who don't want to be there because they realize they need this help, but it is a hostile and unwilling kind of, I know I have to do this, but I don't want to freaking do this. Obviously, a lot of complex trauma, a lot of big issues that have become too big, right? With that, a lot of those people are going to tell you either the worst story to see if they can shock you and find a reason why this won't work, or they're going to give you a mid-range traumatic story. And that story, if you can handle it and not flip out, they will then be able to trust you and open up a little bit more about the worst and darker things that they don't let anybody know. It's a test. If you are dealing with somebody with complex trauma and you do not recognize this as the interview it is, and you react poorly to their trauma, you're going to fail the test. And I say this as somebody who very regularly has done this when I was in my worst spaces. And I have watched therapists cry over a moderate story. And I know other people who have similar kinds of backgrounds to myself who run this kind of test, because not all therapists who claim to be trauma informed are actually informed, and they are not informed about captivity and all of these kinds of things, and they cannot handle those kinds of stories. They simply cannot. Even ones that are specifically affiliated with the military are not necessarily good at those kinds of things, and far too many of them go into this field with like ideas and butterflies and I'm going to help these poor people who've gone through bad things, and they have not mentally and emotionally prepared themselves for the kinds of things they're going to be exposed to. And I say this as somebody who works in the field. I watch people all the time burn out because they can't handle the level of intake that they're hearing at all times. And so, yes, it takes more energy to help a person actually practically have the steps to pack that back in to a functional, limited space so they can work, so that they can have a life, and as they're doing this, unpacking. But it is so essential. This warm, marshmallowy distance of just, I'm holding space for you, is almost always going to set people off who have complex trauma, because that has been used to abuse and or neglect them mostly throughout their lives, especially anybody who has complex childhood trauma.